The final season of Vikings Valhalla has just hit Netflix, and it's safe to say that this season went to corners of the globe that we'd never seen the characters venture to before. With battles, feuds, deceit, romances, and an ending which provided a conclusion to the show that's been 3 seasons in the making. Was it an ending that was deserved, and was it as good as what many people were anticipating? Well, let's jump into the video and break down all that there was to take away from this final season. Here is Vikings Valhalla Season 3 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Harald. Harald probably had the most interesting arc in this season of the show. This season was set 7 years after Season 2 finished, and we saw that he'd been serving alongside Emperor Romanos of Constantinople, and was one of his most trusted companions. Even though he was being intimate with his wife, Queen Zoe. Harald had always wanted to return to Norway to take the throne that he felt was rightfully his, but his comfortable lifestyle and desire to potentially become the emperor was something which kept him there. Something which ultimately went against him, as he ended up being framed for the murder of Romanos when it was Maniakas who staged the whole thing. Harald and Maniakas had a rivalry throughout the entirety of this season, as they both felt as though they were the emperor's main general. However, with Harald getting better treatment from the emperor, that was the very thing which fueled Maniakas to frame Harald and get him out of the picture by sentencing him to death, and ultimately allowed himself to become the new emperor. Whilst Harald was imprisoned and awaiting his execution, he got the crows to start a fire as he was walked out, which caused a distraction. And then the fight that we'd all been waiting for began, Harald versus Maniakas. I was a little bit underwhelmed by it, to be honest, as I thought it would have been a bit closer. But Harald reigned supreme and ended up leaving Zoe in Constantinople, realizing that his greed was what landed him in that very situation, and that he needed to use the riches that he'd put aside to go to Kattegat and take what was rightfully his. When he arrived at Kattegat, Magnus had taken the throne, and he agreed to rule alongside him. However, right at the end, Harald went against Magnus, as Harald knew that he had the majority of the support due to the promise that many of the men made several years ago, and Magnus got thrown into a cell. Within reality, this wasn't actually the case. Harald and Magnus did actually rule alongside one another for a brief while. However, they had separate courts and they kept to themselves. It was also said that a lot of their meetings often ended with physical attacks on one another. A year after they'd ruled alongside one another, Magnus died, which then meant that Harald was able to be the sole ruler of Norway. Freydis. Freydis' story in this season of the show was one that I felt lacked any real value, especially when compared to the previous 2 seasons. It felt like in Season 1 and Season 2, she was shown to be this fierce warrior that was destined to be a ruler and the protector of the old ways. But in this season, it just kind of felt like she was on this journey of island hopping with no real purpose. Her people in Jomsburg suffered the poisoning that Magnus set up on the island to make it look like some kind of plague that spread. And then from there she headed towards Greenland, where she met with her father, Eric the Red, where they clashed over many different things. Mainly because he was struggling, didn't have resources, and with her ships, people, and supplies, they were able to start thriving again. But he saw the threat that she posed in becoming some kind of leader of his people, so she was essentially held captive. It was only once she was freed by her mother that she went to Kattegat and was waiting for Leif with the hope that he'd become her new captain so that they could find the golden land that they both had in their visions. A place for her to settle with her people following what happened in Jomsburg. However, with Magnus killing Svein when he was there, he also had Freydis arrested and planned on burning her, claiming that she was a witch because she believed in the old ways. It was whilst she was in prison that Leif came up with a plan to make it seem like she was summoning the old gods and managed to get her to escape from the stake that she was on. He did this by utilizing the science that he swore that he'd never use again due to the death and devastation that it caused on innocent people at the hands of Maniakas. We never saw her reunite with her son, Harald, but we did see that he was found with Stig when he was in the cave. Freydis didn't even get the revenge on Magnus due to Harald knowing that if she were to have killed him, it would have divided the people, because many of them believed her to be a witch because she believed in the old ways, so he didn't want to be seen as a traitor or a sympathizer. The final time that we saw her, she was on the boat with Leif and they were heading towards the Golden Land, the place which her father didn't believe was true, but she was determined was out there. Personally, I was a bit disappointed with her arc in this season, but the performance of the character was still strong. Leif. Knowing how violent and how brutal of an individual Leif was in the first season of the show, in Season 3 it was the complete contrast. He knew that intelligence was the very thing that gave him the most power, and we saw that being utilized when he traveled to all of the different lands, could speak the languages, understand the people, the culture, and immerse himself within it. Like Freydis, he was also looking to go to the Golden Land. Leif knew that Magnus was lying about his father's body still being preserved and that he was threatening the church in order to keep them on his side to go along with his lies. So Leif utilized the church to get his sister out of the danger that she was in. At the end of the final episode, we saw that he was going off to the Golden Land, reunited with his sister, and was the captain of the ship. When looking at the real-life Leif Erikson, it seems as though this Golden Land that is spoken of could be something which was called Vinland, which in the modern day is said to be a region in North America. So Leif did in fact make it to the Golden Land that he had in his vision and built a small settlement there. If this is to be true, it's said that Leif could have arrived in North America 500 years before Christopher Columbus did. King Cnut. King Cnut's arc was one that was all about ensuring that his bloodline retained its position on the throne following his death as he was in ill health, and also making sure that no blood was spilled between his heirs over who would inherit which crown. This was something which didn't quite go to plan. He didn't believe that any of his children were ready to inherit the title of King of England, so his dying wish was for Emma to be ruler as queen. However, once he died, Emma knew that a threat was on the horizon, so she wanted Edward, her son, to become king. Something that Godwin said he was on side with. However, if there's one thing that we've all learned about Godwin over the course of this show is that he can't be trusted at all. Instead of sending for Edward, he sent for Harald, Harald I, and he took on the title of King of England. It seemed as though in order for Emma to retain her title, she was going to enter a marriage with Harald. When doing some research, it doesn't actually seem like it's that historically accurate, but it kind of stuck true with the theme of the show, with individuals doing anything that they could to keep the power that they had and the titles that they held. Harald did actually inherit the throne from his father in real life, and he went on to rule for 5 years, but he died just as his brother Harthcnut was preparing to invade England from Denmark. This is why I feel the scene at the dinner was shown to us, with the youngest son, Harthcnut, being the most intelligent, because he was the one who went on to actually become king, albeit only for 7 years before his death. My review of the final season. I'm going to be totally honest here, I really wasn't a fan of this season of the show. I felt like it was rather choppy with its pacing because it knew that it had to provide an ending to all of the stories in only 8 episodes. I felt like some of the acting was really over the top and it didn't feel up to its usual standard. Plus, I also felt like certain elements of the story were just rushed. I didn't feel like any of the stories were really that engaging. The most enjoyable one to watch was Harald's, but outside of that, the rest of them just kind of felt a bit bland and like they were on side quests with all of the travelling around. I thought we'd see more battles, more gore, and just more at stake. It just kind of felt like everything was a little bit predictable, which I think was a shame. I don't know whether it's because there might have originally been more seasons planned, and then Netflix decided to only give it one more season, which just meant that the story needed to be told more quickly, but it was something that was definitely felt this season. I also felt like the 7-year time jump didn't really need to be a thing. The characters didn't look any older at all. It didn't feel like they had that much more experience in the world, and also the year isn't really that important in the show, because it doesn't even line up with the real historical events. I think it's a shame because the first season was really strong, the second season took a bit of a dip in quality, and then this third season just didn't quite do it at all. So it's a show that definitely got worse as time went on. It's a shame, but sometimes that's just what happens. So, there you have it. Vikings Valhalla Season 3 ending explained.